Welcome back to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Abby Nicholas.
And I'm Mike Doherty.
Today's episode is the second in our series on the psychology of kindness, where we're exploring the benefits of pro-social behaviors. Last time, we covered the impact of engaging in simple good deeds on mental health. Today, we're going to tackle the question of whether spending money on others rather than yourself increases happiness.
But before we dive into your spending habits, we should remind our listeners about Psych Good Deed Day. What's Psych Good Deed Day, you ask? Well, on October 8th, we're asking folks to do one nice thing for someone else. Our goal is to make the world just a little less crappy by spreading kindness.
And October 18th. Did I just say October 18th?
You did say October 18th.
October 8th isn't just some random date. It also turns out that October 6th through the 12th is Mental Illness Awareness Week. Why is this important? Well, because in addition to making someone else's day by being kind, it's also a pretty good way to boost your own mental health. What better way to recognize Mental Illness Awareness Week than by actually doing something that will boost your own and other people's mood?
So today, we're going to move from doing kind things for others to another form of kindness. Giving, or what some people call pro-social spending. Specifically, we're going to be looking at a groundbreaking study by Elizabeth Dunn, Laura Aknin, and Michael Norton, published in 2008, along with a few recent replication attempts that ask the question, do givers experience emotional benefits from their giving?
Are you ready?
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
Let's start with the original finding. The conventional wisdom has always been that income has a surprisingly weak relationship with happiness, especially once basic needs are met. Despite dramatic increases in real income over recent decades, happiness levels have remained pretty flat in developed countries.
Right, and Dunn and colleagues had an interesting hypothesis about why this might be. They suggested that we're spending our money in ways that don't actually promote lasting happiness, like buying ourselves costly consumer goods that provide little long-term satisfaction.
And so they flipped the question. Instead of asking, does having more money make you happier? They asked, does how you spend your money affect your happiness? And specifically, they wondered whether spending money on others might actually make you happier than spending it on yourself.
Now, they tested this in 3 different ways. First, they surveyed 632 Americans about their spending habits and general happiness. People reported how much they spent monthly on personal expenses versus pro-social spending, such as gifts for others and charitable donations.
The results were pretty striking. Personal spending was completely unrelated to happiness, but higher pro-social spending was significantly associated with greater happiness. And the effects of income and pro-social spending were independent and similar in magnitude.
Their second study was longitudinal. They followed 16 employees who received profit-sharing bonuses and measured their happiness before and after. The key finding? How people spent their bonus predicted their happiness better than the size of the bonus itself. Those who spent more on others were happier.
Now, those first 2 studies were both correlational. Yes, they showed a relationship between giving and happiness, but there's no way to infer causation from these studies. And so that brought us to our third study that was arguably the most important part of the Dunn et al. Paper, where first, the participants were given a small allotment of money and told to either spend the money on themselves or spend the money on someone else by the end of the day. They gave 46 participants either $5 or $20 and randomly assigned them to spend it either on themselves or on someone else by the end of the day.
The results seemed clear-cut. People assigned to spend money on others reported greater happiness than those who spent it on themselves. Interestingly, the amount of money, $5 versus $20, didn't seem to matter at all. But here's the issue. If you look at the results of the study, they look a little shaky. There are 2 main issues we should discuss. First, as Abby just mentioned, this study had only 46 participants. This is a pretty small sample size for a study of this type. And if we're honest, any effect of how you spend your money is likely to be a pretty small effect, if it's there at all. If we want to reliably detect an effect that we think is probably pretty small, we'd want to collect a lot more data. Okay, so that's the first issue. The second issue is that if you look at the results, the effect was barely significant. We typically look for p-values lower than 0.05 to claim that there's enough evidence to establish an effect. And ideally, whatever p-value we obtain is much smaller than 0.05. In this case, the p-value was only 0.042, so it was just barely under the cutoff. This is important because it tells us something about the evidentiary value of the data, that is, the degree to which it supports the evidence for or against the effect. Technically, we'd want to convert this p-value into something called a Bayes factor to quantify the strength of evidence, and if we did this, we'd probably find that this study, while significant, occupies this middle ground, where it tells us basically nothing. It's neither support for the presence of an effect nor support for the absence of an effect. It's what we would call non-informative.
Now, this is where our story takes a fascinating turn into the realities of psychological research. In 2022, a team led by Garam Kim attempted to replicate this key experimental finding. And replication, as we know, is the cornerstone of good science. They designed what we called a close replication with 133 participants, following the original procedures as closely as possible. They gave everyone $10, however, which is kind of splitting the difference between the $5 and $20 amounts, and randomly assigned them to personal or pro-social spending conditions.
But here's where it gets complicated. When they used the exact same analysis as the original study, a complex composite measure of happiness, and combined 10 positive emotion items with an overall happiness rating, they found no significant difference between the groups.
However, they did also include a simpler, more direct measure of happiness that simply asked participants, how happy were you immediately after spending the $10? And using that measure, they did find a significant effect in the same direction as the original study. Participants who spent more on others reported feeling happier than those who spent it on themselves.
Okay, now, going a step further, the original authors also conducted a replication. In fact, ironically, this one actually came before the Garam Kim replication. In 2020, they published a replication of the original study that refines some of the methodology, and I think made some important improvements in experimental control. I won't go into the details, but one major feature of the study is they used what's known as a registered replication approach. Basically, they laid out the entire study design, their dependent variables, laid out their analysis plan, all before they started collecting data. They also collected data from over 700 people, so it was a much larger study with much higher statistical power than either of the other two studies that we talked about.
And another potentially important modification is that the participants bought identical goodie bags rather than choosing their own purchases. So they really tried to control more elements of the study. All pro-social spending went to sick children at a hospital rather than recipients of the participants' choosing. And the amount was also reduced to $2.50. So the gift was less value than some of the prior studies, but it went to kids who might be in greater need of being cheered up. So it may have been of greater value to them. And even with these changes, the authors still found an effect.
Okay, to wrap up, pro-social spending does appear to make people happier. If you want to be happier, think about how you can give to others, whether that be through small gifts or donations or through acts of kindness.
And if you want to practice some of that on Psych Good Deed Day, go for it. It might make you a little happier, but it will definitely make someone else happier.
And if you do participate in Psych Good Deed Day, go to our website at go.umd.edu/GDD and log your good deed on our tracker. Hi everyone, this is Mike with Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science, the podcast I do with Abby, Ben, and Joey right here at the University of Maryland. If you like what you hear or have ideas for future podcasts, please drop us a line at crackingtheshellonpsychology@gmail.com. That's crackingtheshellonpsychology, one big long word, @gmail.com. And while I have you, I want to send a big shout out to Joey Barnett and Jeremy Gordon for producing the music. Thanks guys. We can go ahead and go.
Welcome back to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Abby Nicholas.
And I'm Mike Doherty.